Okay, guys, thank you for coming to our panel. Sound working okay? Okay, guys, we're going to be talking about our emotions today. It's not a therapy session, but you know when your therapist says, I want you to connect with your feelings rather than your rational thoughts. Has anyone had that experience? That's what we're going to be encouraging you to today. We are here to talk about human judgment, human-focused journalism, the kind of connection you can get with audiences when you put trust in human beings to make decisions, and the importance of that kind of storytelling and that kind of positioning of media brands in an environment where more and more content that people consume is created by AI or automatically. And this is something that the three of us really believe in. We believe that in this AI shift, it is all about the voices that you can trust, the stars that resonate, etc. Represented on this stage are 3 independent media companies that in total have more than 100,000 paying members. Lea and Fran wanted to break down that number by company, but I thought that was unnecessary. So just take the 100,000 total. But that's more than 10 million in annual income coming directly from readers in 3 very different contexts. The UK for me, South Africa for Fran, and Denmark for Lea. So the thing that we think is important is that in the quest that we all have here at this festival for journalistic renewal, I think that's what a lot of us are interested in, that we reach for the kinds of storytelling and brand positioning that really connect with people on a human level. That's what I mean about emotions. I think it's understandable that so many people in journalism are reaching for very rational toolkits, things like user information needs, etc. I think there's a big movement of that at the moment, and there's clearly a strong argument for that approach. But what you're going to get from us is a short break in the programming of the rationalists, let's call them. You're going to hear from the romantic school of independent media, people who believe in emotions, people who believe in human connection, etc. And we're going to try and make the case that it makes business sense to operate in this way. It makes business sense to position brands in this way and to do journalism in this way. It's not just something that we believe in because we like it on a sentimental level. We're going to start off with Lea, who, as you know, runs Zetland, unbelievably successful Danish independent media company. Then we're going to go to Fran from Daily Maverick, who's one of the absolute gurus of how you position a brand, how you connect with communities. And then I'll talk a bit about my work in the UK at Mill Media.
Great. Seriously, when Joshi coined the term "the school of the romantics," I was like, I'm in. So I want to take like a deep dive into how that romantic sentiment looks like in the case of Zetland and the newspapers that we publish. But first, for those of you who don't know us, Zetland is a media company really dedicated to journalism as a force for good in society. And now we run Zetland, a digital newspaper in Copenhagen, and also just launched this year in Finland, Uusi Juttu, which is also a digital newspaper run by an amazing crowd up there in Helsinki. And before I go into the nuts and bolts of how that the romantic voice come through, then I'll just throw out 3 major inspirations for me when we have built what we have done. So one inspiration is this guy. His name is Robert E. Park. He was a major, famous sociologist back in the 1920s. After he was an investigative journalist, and he has done this really amazing article. Called The Natural History of the Newspaper. I will recommend it to everyone. And he says, he quotes in that paper Hearst for saying that what Hearst did with his media back in the 18th century, right, was basically to play jazz. and not going for information to people's head, but going first and foremost to really engage the hearts of the audience, and I just really like that. Play more jazz in journalism, right? And another inspiration is Bertolt Brecht, also a guy from the 1920s, the German playwright who really thought that in order to convey truth and tell something important, you have to, on a stage, at some point, say to the audience, remember, this is fiction, and this is why we're here. To actually, in a sense, sort of show the seams, show how it's done, in order for it to resonate. And I just find that thought really appealing. And I put a picture of the Pompidou Center in Paris here as well, because that's what that building does as well, right? Revealing all the stuff that you normally hide inside, behind all the glass and fine facades, in order to build trust, simply. So that is an inspiration. Also, back in 2008, when I lived in New York, I was a volunteer in the Obama campaign, and I was just super inspired about how that campaign was run, on the premise that you cannot, if you are to engage, like, in this case, millions of people in an important case, then you have to tell the story about why you care, you as Obama, and you have to tell the story about why we should care, why we should care, and why you should care now, why it's urgent what you care about. So that was also like a major inspiration for me. Okay, so now into the nuts and bolts. 3 examples of how we try to really reveal that the product that we do is made by humans. One example, this is one of our investigative stories from last year that won a major journalism prize in Denmark. I'm not going to go into what the story was about, because of what I want to show you is how one of the stories' lead was told. This is Thijs, the main journalist behind the series, saying, "Hi, I'm Thijs," in the lead, saying then, "Over the past few months, I've been telling a long series of stories about the enormous multi-billion kroner bill for mink compensations. By the time you hear this, I'll be on vacation, probably sitting at a cafe in Paris. But that doesn't stop us from continuing the series." And then he goes on to say, this story begins when my colleague, late one evening, drove to a secret location to pick up a new stack of confidential documents. That's why she'll be taking over the microphone from here. And then you literally hear, in the audio version of the story, Helle taking over the microphone. And that's just, this is a very serious and an important story, like a deeply classical investigative story, but told in a way so it's super delightful and engaging and transparent about this is made by, in this case, Thijs and Helle. Another thing that we do is that we're just super explicit about why we're here and our values. We have 6 core principles, one of them, and the most important, being we are our members. We are here to serve the community of members. And just using basically every opportunity to remind ourselves and our community about those principles. And lastly, we simply try to just sound like human beings, because we are. And it's funny how in journalism it's actually quite hard to sound like a human being, because we've spent almost like 100 years teaching each other that we should take the human element out of the equation in order to build trust. I think it's the opposite. You should put the humans into the equation in order to build trust. So we really don't hide ourselves. I want to end with an example of how we taught Clara, one of our climate reporters, to sound like herself. So I want to just play 3 super short audio clips. Obviously they are in Danish, but you can read what she's saying here. So before she was taught to speak in her own voice, this is how a lead to one of her stories went. I hope the audio works. Let's try.
Sarasota på en måde lidt ligesom
That's definitely not Clara.
Poolbar og yogastudier lige ved siden af hinanden. De gamle har boet der hele deres liv, og de unge de kommer for at feste i ferierne. Byen den har udviklet sig helt vildt de sidste par år, og selvom der er åbnet mange nye fancy spisesteder, så er det stadig nærmest umuligt at få plads på den gamle.
Okay, that's how she sound. Then into the studio came this amazing lady. She's one of our journalists, and now also the speak coach Miriam. This is to one of our parties. She's also a lead singer in the company band. And then she comes into the studio and learns Clara to speak like herself, like really convey who she is, and it goes like this.
Jeg hedder Clara Grundet, og jeg har skrevet på USA det sidste halve års tid, og nu er jeg tilbage. I'm back, baby.
Ja, det er den der, vi skal frem.
Her på redaktionen.
Intention, ikke?
Hvad er intentionen? Det er sådan, sig det.
Hvad skal den kunne, det du siger der? Hvad er det, jeg skal have ud af dig? Hvad er det for en følelse, eller hvad er det for en energi, du skal give mig?
Ja.
Jeg synger, når jeg starter. Er der et eller andet, der gør, at du kommer
Altså, du synger paragrafen, eller hvad? Synger
jeg
du bare?
synger en eller anden, for eksempel good, 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 good vibrations, vil jeg nok vælge til den her, ikke?
Okay.
Og så vil jeg
And then,
sige, Clara.
magically, Clara has suddenly her own voice. This is how she sounds like when we have lunch, for instance.
Hej, jeg hedder Clara Grundet, og jeg har skrevet fra USA det sidste halve års tid, og nu er jeg kommet tilbage. Jeg er på udlandsredaktionen her på Zetland i København, eller Grænse.
Okay, it is in Danish, but I hope that you can feel that suddenly there's a soul behind the words and the voice. And that is all for me, hopefully. I'm trying to find that one. Yeah, sure.
Hello, everybody. I'm Fran Beighton, and I head up growth at Daily Maverick, which means that on this panel I am going to be talking about brand, voice in brand, and I'm really the money person. That's how we can change a human voice into hard cash. So, so yes, please.
Yeah.
What is a presentation without a Simon Sinek quote? Essentially, I think that one of the biggest problems when people are thinking about a brand voice is that they're not intentional about it. It is usually the voice of a brand is the voice of an like individual journalist or a group of individual journalists kind of amalgamated together, and that's the brand voice. And I think that is a really big problem. It needs to be intentional, deciding on a brand voice, having a conversation, having leadership sit down and ask a couple of questions. And the first question is, why are we doing what we're doing? At Daily Maverick, that's very easy to answer. It is our mission, which is to defend truth. Cool, we know that. That's why we do it. The next question is, who are we? And very few people ask that question. Who are we? What is the tone that we want to depict? What are we going to allow our journalists to do and to speak like? At Daily Maverick, thank you. This is who we are. We are Maverick. We are cheeky. We're fearless. We're intelligent. We know that our journalism is for people who are intelligent. And so creating this brand voice is a very intentional exercise. And from there, we're allowing everybody to work and operate in this space. This is who we are. And I think it's just so important to be intentional about that. But there are three kind of aspects, now that we know why we do what we do and who we are. It's how are we going to bring the human voice into our journalism and into our brand voice. And there's three things for me that absolutely wallop AI, which is, the first is humor. It is our absolute edge over AI. And this banner is my favorite banner that has ever been published on Daily Maverick. It was for our First Thing newsletter, and it's the second best way to start your day. And I wish I had written it. I didn't. It was published 15 years ago, before my time. But this was the banner that made me subscribe to Daily Maverick, because I thought, wow, who are these people with hard-hitting news, investigations, but also a sense of humor? There's something cheeky about them. There's something, I want to go and have a pint in the pub with these guys. And the thing about this banner and about using humor in your marketing is that it also becomes viral. We send each other memes and messages all the time. We never send something dry to each other. Have you seen this? It's really dull. No. You send this, and it has that benefit of actually amplifying your work without any, work on our part. But most importantly, journalism, we must establish that we are in the attention business here. We are, it's been said before, but we are up against Netflix. We're up against podcasts. We're up against our own children, who are all vying for our attention. And humor grabs attention, and it makes the person reading you realize, actually, there's a human behind this. I might be interested in seeing what else you have. I think with humor as well, there's something very important to say, which is, that is not to say that journalists should be comedians. They shouldn't. They absolutely shouldn't. But there is an element where journalists can engage in wit and humor to bring their reader along with them. Oh, isn't it gorgeous? This is Biscuit, and Biscuit is the Daily Maverick dog. Biscuit is also the one person on our team who has converted the most members than anyone else. And let me tell you how. For me, this is the second element of the human voice, which is relatability. So what happened here was that Craig Ray, who is our sports editor, sent this picture on our internal WhatsApp group. And the next day, it became our photo of the day in our First Thing newsletter, which automatically got put onto social media. And we noticed that this photo got 100 times more engagement than any other post that we had posted recently. And the question was why? And the answer is simple. People like dogs. They do. So we put Biscuit on a banner. And it was the most absurd thing. It was completely unexpected. And just to remind you that Daily Maverick is known for hard-hitting investigations, and suddenly Biscuit was on a banner. And we said, this is, we actually call Biscuit our head of marketing. So Biscuit, we just thought we'd try it. Why not? It's a bit of fun. And the membership started to roll in. And the question was why? And the answer is pretty simple, because the people realized that there are humans who also like dogs, presenting the journalism and writing the journalism. They felt connected to us. They felt an emotional connection to the fact that we were dog lovers. So we put Biscuit out onto a direct mailer, which is one of our highest conversions. We emailed the entire newsletter base. Memberships kept coming in, and we roll out Biscuit. We've had to do various different campaigns with Biscuit, and we roll Biscuit out when at times maybe the news is too heavy, and we need to lighten the mood out there in the world, send a little bit of humor, a bit of just a good dog picture out there to our readers. Or if I'm honest, those times when I have no idea what to write, I'll roll out Biscuit, and Biscuit will do the hard work. But it's because it's emotion. And that is the third thing for me that is the most crucial element to the human voice. And it's one that I think the journalism community is actually quite scared of, is leaning into emotion. We shouldn't be, because emotional connections create a sense of belonging. They also cultivate trust. But it is our absolute greatest differentiator against AI. It is the one thing. In fact, actually, I want to try an experiment here. I want you to think about your favorite piece of journalism that you've ever read. Your favorite article, the best piece of journalism you ever read. Do you have one? Okay. Do you remember where you were when you read it? Okay. So I would argue that the fact that you remember where you were when you read that piece of journalism wasn't because the writing was great or because it was revealing something, but it is because it gave you had an emotional reaction to it. That's why you had a visceral reaction to it. So for journalists and journalism and the brand voice as well, to lean into emotions, what you're actually doing is trying to connect deeply. I mean, we have this in movies, where in a movie, a beautiful piece of music will play and your emotions will be heightened. Journalists have the same tools, and we call it punctuation. You know, it is to elicit the rhythm of emotion through journalism is something that I think we need to lean into. And one of the things that, you know, I agree with Joshi when we talk about there are various frameworks out there that are being used all over the world, but for me are a bit shallow. You know, they're not actually getting to the crux of it. And these are some of the most common positive and negative emotions that we feel every day. And I think a lot of people are afraid of their readers having a negative emotion when they're reading something. But in actual fact, it doesn't matter if your reader feels a positive or a negative emotion when they're reading you. The most important thing is that the emotion is an active emotion. So in red, we've got the active emotions. If somebody finishes a piece of journalism, reading a piece of journalism, and they feel content, well, that's dull. And they're not going to remember it, and they're not going to care about it, and they're certainly not going to be brought to feeling to do something, to do a piece of action like finish the piece or, you know, pay for that kind of journalism. In fact, I think that the most powerful combination is fear. That's not to say you're to fearmonger just for the sake of subscribers, but the combination of fear with hope. And I really think that this active emotion, and that people should be intentionally writing with what is the emotion that I want my reader to feel when they read this, and to visualize that and actually actively try and achieve it through your writing. So, yeah, whether you're nudging a reader to read to the end of your article or you're giving a specific call to action, it doesn't matter how much logic you use, how clever your argument is. If it's devoid of emotion, you're not going to move them to do anything. And I think that's true. If you read content generated by AI, that is the big difference. You know, there's storytellers amongst us, and we should be leaning into that. So there's something wrong with my slides. What this was going to tell you is, does this mean that we abandon AI? Not in the least. AI, ChatGPT is my favorite colleague, except for Biscuit. And the reason I care and I love ChatGPT is because, first of all, they're always available. Secondly, they interrogate my thinking. And finally, I can use it to try and enhance my writing, but it's never going to give me those three things, which is humor, or relatability, or emotion. And those are the three things that I value in humans. And that's why I feel very safe in my job. And I'm not in the least bit threatened by AI, but I'm very happy that it's there for research.
Awesome. That's quite hard to follow, because I think that was one of the most sort of thoughtful explanations of the importance of human connection in journalism that I've ever heard. What I want to talk about a little bit is how that kind of approach, how really thinking about journalism that makes people feel connected, that moves people, has worked for us. So I started this company, Mill Media, 5 years ago. And at a fundamental level, I wanted to inspire a renaissance in high-quality local journalism in the UK. We all know why local journalism matters. This was how Bernie Sanders articulated the question when he came to our office last year, which was like, how can you be a good citizen and participate if you don't know what's going on? I think it's that, and I think it's also people need to feel connected to the places that they live. People need to feel connected to each other, need to feel connected to the people in your city, even if you don't meet them on a daily basis. And I think you build that connection and solidarity by giving people stories that really connect with them. So I started this company on my own. It was a one-man band. I wrote one article a week, long-form article about one city on Substack. And because lots of people joined the free email list, I turned on paid subscriptions, and because lots of people joined up paid, it turned into a business. So we're now, here's the Mill homepage from last week. We now have operations in 6 cities in the UK. We have 21 full-time journalists and dozens more kind of part-time and regular contributors. And here's our office in Manchester, described by one leading media critic as the most beautiful offices in new media. And we now have, actually last night we got to 10,000 paying members across our network, which is something I've been working towards for 5 years. So, thank you. And the key thing is that the model is sustainable. The point of doing this is to create a sustainable model for local journalism in the UK, not just to create an enormous company with a huge headcount that can't pay for itself or that will topple over if it doesn't get a grant. So our first 4 cities, if you take the first 4 cities we launched in, they are now profitable, right? So they are sustainable on reader revenue. We do a tiny bit of advertising, it's about 5%, but they're sustainable on reader revenue. And the 2 latest ones we've launched in Glasgow and London, I mean, we only launched a few months ago, but you know, they will also get to that profitability point. So we're trying to build genuine sustainability. This is how Mark Thompson, who's one of our investors, he used to run the New York Times and the BBC, now he's running CNN. Not a bad CV, but he articulated it, I think, in a really good way. He said Britain's cities need great commercially sustainable journalism. And my feeling when I started this was that the only way I could stand out at creating a new media brand in these cities was if I brought an approach that was about narrative journalism, was about storytelling. It was about the kind of journalism that makes me feel something when I read it, like Fran said. The great journalism that you read is stuff that connects with you on an emotional level. So that was going to be my approach. And I think that's been kind of key to our success so far. I tried to kind of distill what the keys to our approach have been. I think believing in storytelling has been a huge one. A huge amount of media is told in a basic news format, you know, tell people all the most important information in the first 3 paragraphs, which made a ton of sense in the print era. When you, as a journalist, you didn't know if the subs downstairs in the basement were going to cut off half your story just before the newspaper went on stone. You had no idea. You had to put all the most important stuff at the beginning. If you put it at the end, it would make no sense when the story got cut in half. It doesn't obviously make sense in digital anymore. And I think there are a lot of stories that should be told as a story. The kind of way you'd tell it if you went to the pub and met someone, you wouldn't like tell them all the most important information in the first sentence because it would make for a really dull storytelling. You would tease what happened and then you'd hold stuff back and you'd use suspense, etc. I think storytelling is incredibly powerful. I think the other thing is like having a familiar tone. So in the early days, we referred to our readers as millers. They were reading the Mill. Didn't totally make sense as a nickname, but it kind of caught on. And it made people feel like they were part of something. I think there's a huge need in society, particularly at the moment, for people to feel connected to things. People aren't connected to each other and to institutions in the local area as much as they used to be. And I think as journalists, we should be trying to give people opportunities to connect again. So having that familiar tone really helped. I'll show you an example in a minute. The third one is involving readers. I think, as I said, people want to feel part of something. People want to tell their friends that they're a part of the Mill, they contributed a story, etc. Most of our big stories come from our readers. You just have to hit reply to the email and get in touch. I'm sure many of you who run newsletters know this mechanism. You get amazing stories if you build a connection with people via email because they can just hit reply and tell you about things. The final point is maybe I think the most important. when you're publishing a pretty low volume of stories, I mean, I started writing like one a week, and now we only do like 3 main features a week in every city, plus like a news briefing on a Monday. When you're doing that level of content, you have to make decisions about what to run. There are hundreds of things you could cover every week, and you can only cover 3 of them. And my approach to that is try and hire editors whose taste I trust, whose human judgment I really believe in, and let them make decisions. And let them make decisions that would never be made if you were being led entirely by the data, would never be suggested if you asked an AI chatbot on a Monday, what should we cover this week? You have to let human beings make the kind of quixotic, strange, eclectic choices that human beings make. Why? Because those kind of choices connect with people. Because human beings are very random, very eclectic, very interesting, very diverse. And so that's been an approach that's been good for us. I want to give you a few examples before we finish up and take some questions. This was an intro that I didn't write, but one of my team must have written it on Monday, because I was in Rome. And this is like an intro to a Monday newsletter, obviously very silly, and didn't talk about any of the journalism that was in the newsletter, but just like a fun way to get people's attention, and like a fun way to make you feel like there's a person writing this rather than a machine. I think Fran's point, and perhaps it was Lea's point, about how for decades we have conditioned ourselves as journalists to write in a way that is quite robotic, to write in a way that is quite formal. I like opening a newsletter in that way. I don't know which one of my team wrote that, but I'm pleased that they're writing like that because I think it shows that they're connecting with people. In terms of involving readers, we had a situation last year where we did a story about a leading advisor to the mayor of Manchester, the man on the right, called Sacha Lord, sort of leading businessman and advisor in Manchester. And he had a company that had obtained £400,000, so $500,000, from the government during COVID, with an application for his company that was incredibly misleading, deeply dishonest, had like dozens of fabrications, and he had gained that money without anyone knowing about it until we reported it. He then threatened to sue us. He said, if you don't take this story down by Tuesday at 4 p.m., and the lawyer's letter came in on the Friday, we'll sue you for damages. And he even told the Times, a national newspaper, we're going to sue the mill. So there's a story in a national paper on the Monday saying, Sacha Lord has advised lawyers to sue the mill. I think in that moment, a very kind of mill way to handle it was to go to the readers and say, we need your help. You guys know a lot more than us about the documents that we're reporting on. We've already proven that there were lots of lies in these documents. But you guys are lawyers, you guys are police people, you guys work in hospitality, you work in law. You will be able to help us by finding more inconsistencies and lies in this document. So I published the document publicly. I asked people in this editorial for people to go through it. I called it a community fact check. I said, for the next 2 days, you guys need to help us out. And dozens of people emailed and said, oh, I know something about this. This line in the application document that he made for the funding was wrong. This line is a lie. Call up my friend in Spain who ran this festival. They didn't work at that one, etc. And within 2 days, we had strengthened our hand to the point that, first of all, Sacha Lord's lawyers withdrew the legal threat. And secondly, the Arts Funding Council in the UK decided that they were going to investigate what was happening. And then it took 8 months of investigation for some reason, but eventually the Arts Council decided they wanted that money back, so hopefully that money will get returned to the state. And also, Sacha Lord had to resign from his position. And I put a lot of that down to involving readers and really taking a kind of human approach to that moment and really saying, hey guys, we're in a hole here, we're in a difficult position, we're getting sued by a really rich guy, help us out. I think that kind of approach really works for independent media. This is the kind of story where I just kind of think a story like this only happens if you really put your trust in editors. One of my great editors, Sophie Atkinson, wanted to go and find the secret garden, from the novel. And she had this theory about where it was in Salford, or what it was based on. It turned out she was wrong. But then she found this other really beautiful garden on the way, and she wrote a really beautiful piece about finding this garden. And I thought it was fantastic. And it's exactly the kind of thing that Sophie could produce, because I because I put my trust in her, or it's the kind of thing that she can produce because she knows that the constraints aren't you have to cover things that are in the news, you have to cover things that would be suggested by the data. It's kind of just like the kind of story that comes about from this kind of quixotic human judgment. Here's another one. One of my team, Molly Simpson, Chanel came to town to do a fashion show in Manchester. And we struggled to cover it because all the national newspapers were covering it. And also we couldn't get access to the fashion show. It was really annoying. Like all the Vogue journalists were there, but we were not. So Molly decided to crash the after party. And she kind of turned up with a glass of champagne in her hand and a kind of, a black dress, and pretended to the bouncers that she'd just left to have a cigarette, and walked into the Chanel after party with all the models and stuff and wrote like an amazing piece. Again, that's kind of like the kind of commissioning that I like from my editors, because it's just like you wouldn't get it anywhere else, and it's fun, and it's got that kind of human component to it. This was one of my favorite stories that I've written. I interviewed a guy who had been living in the same block of social housing for decades, literally in the same tower block, and basically didn't have any human contact with the world. Like, I bumped into him. Sometimes I wander around neighborhoods in Manchester just to meet people, for stories, obviously. And I bumped into this guy, and I spoke to him probably only for 20 minutes, but he basically has no human contact with the world, I think he sees his brother every 6 months or something. And the way he speaks and the way he thinks is very conditioned by the fact that he never sees anyone. And so I just did this story on a whim, because I didn't have a story for Saturday. So I wrote a short story, 1,000 words, about this guy. And it turned into one of our really popular stories, because it gives an insight into a social problem, but it isn't led by an idea. It's not like The Guardian saying you should care about people who are living on the margins of society. It's saying here's a guy who's at the margins of society. Again, I think that comes down to like human editorial judgment that you might not get in other journalistic contexts. This is my final slide. I wanted to again make the point for all of us that the approach that we're talking about here is about business. It is about getting people to pay for journalism. It is brilliant in terms of building community. It is brilliant in terms of serving our purpose of doing great public interest journalism. But the point is, it also gets results. Okay, it means you're really thinking about the readers. You're trying to connect with them. As you can see from the line of our growth over the past few years, with not much investment, we've had a fairly consistent growth pattern. I'd obviously always like to grow faster, but it's pretty consistent. And I think that shows there's a lot of demand for this kind of journalism. I think it shows that the approach that we've been talking about, where you put people at the center of it again, you allow human beings to make editorial decisions. You don't become too led by grids about user information needs or AI chatbots. That approach can really work in terms of creating sustainability in journalism, as well as creating stories that really change people's lives and really connect with people. So thanks so much for listening, and we're going to take questions now.
You can leave your fancy, impressive graph if you want to.
There we go.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for all this information. It was super interesting. I work for a big kind of legacy paper in Canada that's been around since God was a boy, and who's now trying to kind of pivot towards more, newer forms of connecting with younger audiences, because that's kind of something we're missing. And I'm wondering if it's possible for a media that has a bit more of like a serious reputation, maybe a little bit more intimidating, to put into action what you're proposing, and if you have any advice for a journalist who's trying to be a part of that.
I think I would say there should be no, we do serious stuff. It's important stuff. So the thought that being human, building relationship, nurturing that sense of belonging is something that the fun kids on the block do is just, or should do, is false. I really think, for the reasons Josh just said, it's good for business. And what's good for business in journalism is good for society, or should be at least. But yeah, you're right. Obviously, it's a challenge to take like a company that probably, I would guess, have at its center that neutral tone of voice, the non-human emotionless way of communication and turn it upside down. But go ahead. I would say one thing. I actually think it was important that Joshi showed a picture of the office. If an office looks like something that is not built for humans, then you can't be human in it. There was an interior designer who came to visit us at Zetland who said, "This looks like a grown-up kindergarten," and I kind of like that because what she said is this is a playful place. So maybe start out by redecorating the.
Can I jump in here? I would, if you're looking to do this kind of shift, it's a great opportunity to go back and have that conversation of who are we? Now's your time to have that conversation. And by having that conversation, you're going to be able to get some momentum behind it. But as Lea says, at Daily Maverick, we do really hard-hitting journalism. One of our biggest investigations came out a couple of years ago, where we discovered a brilliant investigative journalist, Kevin Bloom, wrote about cartels that were working inside the electricity state-owned enterprise. So to put that into perspective, South Africa has been experiencing load shedding for 15 years, which is just blackouts. And this investigation showed that some of those were happening deliberately by cartels. And I have just found it, and it was a brilliant piece that resulted in over 400 people signing up to become members that day. And it opens with, the organogram was the size of the boardroom table. Approaching it, there was a distinct feeling that what we were about to see could never be unseen. The country we thought we lived in from that moment on would be an entirely different place. That's all it takes. It's the storytelling of the investigation. And immediately he invited all of the readers to come on the journey and the process with him. And that's what was so powerful. So you don't need to try and please younger readers. Younger readers are interested in the same thing as older readers. They want to know the truth. They want to know important stories. But if you create it in a way that's engaging, that reads like a thriller, but is true, it's incredibly powerful.
Cool, let's take another one. Who's got the microphone? Yeah, there we go. In the middle. Maybe you could pass that microphone forward. Nice.
My name is Anastasia, and I'm working on AI assistant that help women to report on gender-based violence cases. And we have lots of discussion about how it is important to build diverse, multidisciplinary team, that people who work in AI should come from different disciplines and different industries. And my question, do you see future collaboration with AI initiatives and AI projects, considering that it also can make AI industry better?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think none of us would rule out working with AI in our editorial process. And as Fran says, she already uses it a lot. I use it for things as well. So I don't know the specifics of what you guys are working on. It sounds really cool. Definitely want to talk about it. But I think that what we're really trying to make the case, the romantic school case, guys, that you can take away with you, is that it should be human judgment and human decision-making and human taste that is at the heart of things. And I think, in terms of using AI for different research tasks or different ways of improving things, I think that's definitely, there's definitely room for that. I'm almost certain we'll all be doing more of that in future. But we really want the journalism industry to stop laying off editors all the time because you don't need editors or whatever, when actually we think editors are the key human pivot point of a media company. That's what we'd say. But we definitely wouldn't rule out using lots of AI for different functions. But yeah. Thanks for the question.
I just want to bring up one last thing with our romantic school that we're launching today. Welcome.
Our followers are here.
Yeah. We should get a
Come join.
We should get a handshake.
Yeah, we'll have an initiation tonight, guys.
It would be a hug. So the thing about the whole idea behind this is that, again, going back to, we're trying to grab attention in a world that is just flooded with content. And, for journalism to draw attention, everything we spoke about is actually trying to convince people to fall in love with your brand. It's the same as dating. You know, if you go on a date with someone, you hope that they're a little bit funny, that they can make you laugh. You hope that they have a dog, if you have a dog, or you have some sort of commonality or relatability. And then ultimately you hope that they're going to give you some sort of an emotional feeling on the positive side. And in the same way, as if we approach journalism and writing and connecting with people with, you know, what is the oldest form of connection, falling in love. I mean, and it sounds ridiculous, but I think that if we included a little bit more of that in our journalism, it does turn into profit.
That's the manifesto for the romantic school. I think we can take one more question. I'm looking at the clock. I think we can take one more question, and there's, last one.
I wanted to ask you, in digital journalism right now, and for us, data is the talk of town. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of data do you use to make decisions? I mean, it cannot all be gut-based, right? Like a gut feeling.
Yeah, it's definitely not all gut-based. I think the way we do it is we look at which stories have performed the best in terms of signing up new members, in terms of engaging people, people commenting, retention. And I think you want to have that in your mind. But I think the key moment in any media company is the moment in the week where the editor makes decisions about what to run and not what to run, and what not to. And I don't think data should be first and foremost the source for that decision making. I think it's context. But I think that a lot of media companies would produce much more interesting, much more engaging, much more connecting content, stories, if the editors were really just trusted to make interesting judgments for themselves. So I'd say data's nice side context.
But can I add to that? Because I think that the school of, what are we calling ourselves? The romantic school? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, come on.
So what I would like for the romantic school to develop is a way to measure these metrics of success. How many people did we get to cry? How many people did we get to laugh? How many people did we get to have an interesting, in-depth conversation with another person? How many people did we push into maybe thinking a little bit different about the world? That's the kind of metrics that really matters. And I think if you think about those metrics when you judge what story to publish, then you should be good.
Our team is data obsessed. We track everything, including the tone of every email, so it's really important.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for coming, and see you soon.